Program on the line with us is our old buddy David Pakman, the host of the David Pakman Show, the author of the new book, The Echo Machine: How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth. The book is, the pub date is actually March 25th, so you can advance order it now at your favorite bookstore. DavidPakman.com is his website, and also David Pakman, P-A-K-M-A-N, on Blue Sky. David, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked. I got an advance copy of your book several months ago, and I've read it. I think it's just absolutely brilliant. Give us the elevator pitch here, the overview of what you're trying to communicate.
Really 3 points, and great to see you, Tom. Number one is that Trump is really a consequence of a process that started really with racist resentment as the civil rights era started in the late 1950s, and that going through Reagan, Gingrich taking over control of the House of Representatives in '94, Bush, resentment against Obama. Really, this is the path that led to Trump, number one. Number two, that a lot of the problems that we're often told by the American right wing that we just can't solve, we're too big of a country to do what Scandinavia does, and we're too mixed a country to do what Portugal does, that's really not true. And we look at 5 different progressive successes of social democracy. And then number three, that a lot of the problems we're facing, once people are 40 and engaged in politics, they're tough to fix. They really need to be fixed much earlier with critical thinking and media literacy. And schools are really failing kind of by Republican design to teach those things.
There was a fascinating interview between Christian Amanpour and a Russian political analyst who's outside of the Soviet, or outside of Russia now, in which he said that when Gorbachev essentially told the people of the Soviet Union that communism doesn't work any longer, that it was inevitable that the USSR would collapse. That would be the end of it. And that what Putin believes right now, and this analyst said he thinks Trump believes this too, is that if you can convince Americans that democracy doesn't work either, that American democracy, that a pluralistic society, racially, religiously, socially, culturally, economically integrated society doesn't work, that a three-part branch of government with checks and balances, if you can convince people that all of that doesn't work, then what you're doing is you're establishing the foundation for the Putinization of America, for turning America into Russia. To what extent, A, would you agree with that thesis? And B, if so, when did that message start becoming part of right-wing media? Because I don't recall, I recall the backlash in the 50s. I'm a lot older than you. I remember Brown, well, I don't remember Brown v. Board. I was 3 years old, but I remember the giant billboards, impeach Earl Warren, were all over Michigan when I was growing up as a kid. I remember the colored-only signs at Jack Tar Hotel in downtown Lansing. And I remember the blowback, against the civil rights movement. But I don't remember Republicans back in the day, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, saying government doesn't work until Reagan came along, basically.
I think that's exactly right. And I've got a book behind me, Waves of Rancor, which is out of print, but it's an excellent story of how AM radio started to be taken over by right-wing interests, and how it started with churches also jumping in on low-power FM radio station licenses. And that, combined with the sort of Reagan era, is exactly when that started. And I do agree with your assessment about the Putinization. And more broadly, it's this idea that if you want to turn people against a system, you make it function really poorly, and we saw it with Trump in the first term with Louis DeJoy and the post office. We're seeing it now with concerns that it's conceivable, depending on how far Musk and Trump get with Doge, that there could be delays or interruptions to Social Security disability payments, or that instead of taking 9 months to get your initial benefits, that it could take much longer. All of these things make people say this system isn't working well, and that creates a pretext for maybe saying, I don't know, maybe we should privatize. Maybe elements of this would be better served by private interests, at least as far as Trump and Musk see it. And I do think that when that became prevalent was with the advent of AM radio in its sort of modern format during the Reagan era.
Yeah, I'm with you. So if we look at the people who funded all this stuff, I mean, you know, the high-profile guys, of course, in the early days were the Koch brothers, but before them it was the Hunt brothers down in Texas. Those were the people that Dwight Eisenhower wrote about in his 1957 letter to his brother Edgar, saying, you know, their number is small and they are stupid. And you know, since then we've seen not just other American right-wing billionaires, but right-wing billionaires from around the world throwing money in to these kind of campaigns and these kind of things. You got the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his buddies, his family, helping Elon Musk finance the purchase of Twitter, for example. So what is in it for these billionaires? Is it that they just cynically don't like democracy? Is it that they really believe, you know, the Ayn Rand theory that you know, all good things come from private enterprise and all bad things come from the state? Is it, you know, what is motive? Is there a singular motivation?
I don't think there's a singular motivation, but I do think that at the end of the day, if we wanted to boil it down, it would be ultimately what's best for me, and what sort of infrastructure and framework can I create that would be most useful to my interests. And this is now not in the book, but it's something I've been talking about a lot recently, which is the 2024 election, including the last 6 months of the year, really showed us the sort of cashing of the checks that had been written with regard to the media ecosystem that the right's been building for a very long time. I was fortunate enough to be invited to go meet with top Biden administration officials, including Biden himself, in December, right? So after Harris had already lost, after it was too late to create the sort of community media ecosystem that Turning Point USA and Daily Wire and others created, and after Trump and Republicans really took advantage of it by appearing on these programs and appearing regularly. And we talked about the fact that we simply do not have on the left that which exists on the right. And as you're pointing out, it goes back a very long time. There just isn't an equivalent funding structure. And so all of the things I write about in the book ideologically and from an educational standpoint are critical. But also at some point, if we are just completely overpowered financially, it's going to be very difficult to change that status quo.
We're speaking with David Pakman. He's got a new book out, The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth. He's also the host of the David Pakman Show, davidpakman.com, Pakman. David, I think one of the driving dynamics here is that, well, let me just tell you a quick story. A couple of years ago, back 6-8 years ago, I just revealed. A United States senator, who shall remain unnamed, invited me to his office to a meeting with a billionaire who owned about 800 radio stations. And the senator said, you know, why don't you put Thom's show on some of your stations? You've got, you know, 300 or 400 of these stations are carrying right-wing programming all day long. Shouldn't you have a little variety? And the guy said, just bluntly, he said, I'll never put anybody on the air who wants to raise my taxes. Then a couple of months after that, we had Morris Pearl on the program, the co-founder of the Patriotic Millionaires. And he made the point that he and his fellow wealthy guys who are funding Democrats are actually funding politicians who are promising to raise their taxes. And that is a very difficult dynamic, particularly for people who are primarily motivated by money, which is most billionaires. So how do we deal with that? I mean, we used to have guardrails that were put into place, you know, from the Tillman Act in 1907 that made it a federal felony for any corporation to give money to any candidate for federal office, to the campaign finance limits from the 1970s, you know, that came out of the Nixon bribery scandals. But that all got blown up with Citizens United.
I don't think there's one solution, but one of the greatest kind of inoculating forces that exists against falling for this stuff in the first place is if kids just start learning how to decipher media messages for themselves, how to think critically, how to evaluate whether an argument makes sense, whether they're looking at a primary source when they're looking at some kind of report or commentary or news, or whether they're looking at opinion. It's such basic stuff. And for the book, I look at how Finland does it. And I don't think it will shock some of your audience to hear that Finnish high school students are better at media literacy in Spanish as their second language than many American high schoolers are just at media literacy in English. And right. the degree to which we have fallen behind by design. And again, we talked about making a system dysfunctional to make people oppose it. This is why the state boards of education have eliminated a lot of this curricula, precisely because if 10-year-olds know how to decipher media messages, it's much less likely they were ever believe, for example, in trickle-down economics and the idea that cutting taxes for the rich and corporations is the way to improve the lives of the average person. And so there's significant motivation to keep that out of schools, and I think that that's a big area to start.
Yeah, I totally get it. We have 45-second break here, David. We're talking with David Pakman. He's got a new book out, The Echo Machine. What's your call for action?
The call for action number one is to start connecting how who we vote for really relates to what happens in people's lives. And we had two gifts on this from the Trump administration, tragic gifts. The story of man votes Trump, wife gets deported 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. And more recently, man votes Trump, wife gets arrested and detained by ICE. Those sorts of stories where people really start to understand the stakes, I think, are one of the greatest motivators for getting people involved in the political system. It's just the starting point, but it is a starting point. And I think Democrats need to be better at telling those stories.
Amen. See Chuck Schumer. Yes. Okay, David, the great David Pakman. David, thank you so much. The book, The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth, available at wherever your fine books are available. David and David Pakman, PAKMAN.com. David, thanks so much for dropping by and for writing a great book.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We'll be right back.